Where the hell are we? What are we doing?
Hey, what's up? It's been a while. As most of you already know, I've been home to Wales to see my family and friends, and I had a wonderful time. It was awesome. See my 4 episodes on my journey to Wales to catch up on that story. But now it's time to continue our story of the prison planet. We're at the stage where we are ready to look at a bit of history, both Hebrew and Sumerian, to understand where we have possibly come from as a species. We have had a glimpse of how the prison works that we live in, through the corruption of the various swamp creatures around the world. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that our politicians are compromised. We also saw how that they are basically powerless, since we live in an oligarchy and not a democracy, and that they are in the pockets of such entities as Big Pharma, the banks, and Wall Street, to name just a few. But it's now time to move to the next phase of the journey. But first, a little explanation of an apparent contradiction in the last video. Some of you may have noticed it. I didn't until it was already uploaded and posted. Here it is. Then there is the recent Mueller report on the so-called Trump-Russia collusion. All this was paid for by the corrupt Clintons. And surprisingly, CNN came out with this admission.
The report is now here. It has dropped, and it might not have produced everything of what some Republicans hoped for. It is, regardless, devastating to the FBI, and to a degree, it does exonerate Donald Trump.
The instigators of this scam, which we US taxpayers paid for, by the way. Did you catch that? Did Clinton Inc. pay for the Russia collusion scam? Or we taxpayers? A little confusing to say the least. So what happened? Well, to cut a long story short, besides being a grumpy old git, I have cognitive decline. I'm old and I'm senile. What I should have explained and didn't, because I thought you could read my mind.
My mind to your mind, my thoughts to your thoughts.
Spot, was that I was talking about 2 different things. What the Clinton sewer rat and the DNC paid for was the now infamous Steele dossier. In the 2016 presidential campaign, Clinton and the Democratic National Committee hired the law firm Perkins Coie, which in turn hired Fusion GPS, a research and intelligence firm, to conduct opposition research on Republican candidate Donald Trump and his so-called ties to Russia, which turns out didn't exist. But on Federal Election Commission forms, the Clinton campaign classified the spending as legal services, and so by intentionally obscuring their payments through Perkins Coie and failing to publicly disclose the true purpose of those payments, the Clinton campaign and DNC were able to avoid publicly reporting on their statutorily required FEC disclosure forms the fact that they were paying Fusion GPS to perform opposition research on Trump, with the intent of influencing the outcome of the 2016 presidential election. Smoke and mirrors, folks. The Steele dossier was a report compiled by former British spy Christopher Steele and financed by Democrats that included sensational allegations about Trump's conduct in Russia and allegations about his ties between the Trump campaign and Russia, which was all made up, by the way. What we taxpayers paid for, since we fund the FBI through taxes, was the FBI's attempt in investing significant resources into this scam to corroborate the fake dossier and who relied substantially on that fake dossier to obtain surveillance warrants targeting former Trump campaign aide Carter Page. Because of this piece of subterfuge, the Clinton 2016 presidential campaign and the Democratic National Committee agreed to pay $113,000 to settle a Federal Election Commission investigation. Peanuts, really, into whether they violated campaign finance law by misreporting spending on research that eventually became the infamous Steele dossier. Charming, right? So that's the distinction I had in my mind. And you couldn't read that? Seriously? Now we have that little episode in my mental decline out of the way. Let's look at the history of the Anunnaki and Elohim to gather further intelligence on our imprisonment here on planet Earth.
Call fusion GPS.
Yeah. Right. Hey fellow Grumpies, welcome to the Grumpy Grandpa channel, where we try to avoid controversy, maintain a cheerful outlook on life, and maneuver around cerebral issues by keeping a positive mindset.
I'm not senile. I'm not senile.
I mentioned in the last video that I believe we humans have experienced an interruption in our evolution or development by the intervention of the gods. Just another way to explain the Anunnaki and Elohim, which I think are one and the same. What I'm going to do or argue for is that these gods intervened and genetically upgraded humanity to use as a slave species.
That baby takes the morning train. He works from 9 till 5 and then he takes another home again to find me waiting for him.
Does this kind of resonate with you? No, not my dancing. The daily slog, the rat race, the corporate grind, the daily toil, everyday drudgery, the daily hustle. Well, you get it, right? It seems life is just one great uphill struggle. What I'm saying is that we were the bitches of the gods. Some of us still are the bitches of one corporation or another. Nothing changes, does it? So who were the Anunnaki and why are they so important to our story? Well, the Anunnaki are ancient Mesopotamian deities which appear in the so-called mythology and religion of the Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian and Assyrian peoples. Anunnaki translates as those who from heaven to earth came in the Sumerian language. Zecharia Sitchin, author of several books on the Anunnaki, puts forward an explanation for the origins of humanity in the form of extraterrestrials coming to Earth from the planet Nibiru. He maintains that this extraterrestrial species came to Earth in order to mine for gold, which was needed to create gold particles to envelop their planet to protect it. He says that the planet was facing a dire situation. Ecological deterioration was threatening life on the world, and there was an urgent need to protect its dwindling atmosphere. Here's where the gold comes in. It was to be used as a protection shield. Gold on Nibiru was apparently exceptionally rare, so they set out to find a planet where it was more plentiful. So about 445,000 years ago, the Anunnaki arrived on Earth and tried to obtain gold first from the waters of the Persian Gulf, but this endeavor failed. So they began to mine for the gold in southern Africa, which was found to be plentiful, kind of. Then the Anunnaki workers mutinied over the workload and working conditions imposed on them. Maybe we should take a leaf out of their book, huh? So because of this rebellion, it was decided to create a breed of workers who would do the mining for them. This is where the chief scientist of the Anunnaki named Enki and the chief medical officer called Ninhursag, him, her. This is where they come in. They used genetic manipulation to create primitive Homo sapiens to take over the hard labor in the gold mines. Now, according to Sitchin, Homo sapiens were created in the likeness of the Anunnaki. Does this sound familiar? Do you know your Genesis version?
Let us make man in our image, after our likeness.
Genesis 1:26. The original species used for this upgrade is thought to be the indigenous Homo erectus. Through trial and error, the desired result was eventually reached, and humans, as we know them today, were born. As we will see in a later episode, there are obvious parallels to this story in the book of Genesis. This similarity is what struck me in these early so-called separate accounts of creation. What's the link? Well, do you remember Abraham, soon to become Abraham, father of the Hebrew nation? Well, he came from Ur of the Chaldeans in Mesopotamia. Yeah, that's right. He originated in the very place the Anunnaki is thought to have ruled earlier. And the Mesopotamian accounts of creation would have been second nature to him. So I think we can reasonably conclude that the Babylonian creation stories and subsequent Anunnaki stories probably followed him to Canaan. We know that these reports predated the biblical accounts of creation. So did the writer or writers of the Pentateuch, which are the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and which traditionally is attributed to Moses, did they plagiarize the earlier Sumerian and Akkadian accounts recorded in the cuneiform tablets? An interesting supposition, don't you think? So I'm suggesting that the evolution and migration of the humans from the Fertile Crescent into the Canaanite region also involved the rewriting of the ancient Sumerian religion. This, to me, is a retelling of our ancestors' paleo-contact with ETs. What we need to understand is that the cuneiform tablets are the most ancient narrative in the world. They go back to the beginning of civilization. So when we come to the biblical record, these Sumerian stories had been around for 1,500 to 2,000 years already. Author and pastor Paul Wallace, or former pastor I should say, has done some deep research into this subject, and he has listed a whole slew of ancient mythologies around the world, basically outlining the same story of an intervention of a superior ET race, whom the Assyrians called the Anunnaki and the Hebrews the Elohim. These gods, or powerful ones, dominated human society and took on the role of leadership and presented themselves as gods. They eventually handed this oversight over to human governors or kings only at a later stage in our development. They were regarded as gods because of their advanced technology and the creation stories in human culture. Now we have an example of this in recent times. Have you heard of the cargo cult in the South Pacific?
Imagine that you meet a strange white-faced man who has the most incredible things. He has jeeps, he has petrol lamps, he has simple things like a fountain pen. And you look at a thing like this, and the first thing that you say is, this couldn't possibly have been made by man. And if it isn't made by man, then it must come from the gods. And in the Pacific and in the island of Tanna, such a cargo cult is going on at this very moment. Nearly all the natives of Tanna believe in this strange man who will come and will bring all the cargo. And they call him John Fry. Imagine that the cargo has come to your island in either a great white ship or an aeroplane. Why has it come to these white-faced people? They've done nothing to deserve it. They don't make them themselves, you can see that. What's more, they put up great masts with wires on the top, and then they dress up people in similar uniforms and march them up and down in a senseless, useless way. They certainly aren't doing any good. And then it dawns on you, this is the secret. The white people are doing this as a sort of ritual designed to make the gods send the goods to them, the cargo. Therefore, if you want the cargo, you yourself must do these extraordinary.
During World War II, these islands saw airplanes land with all sorts of valuable supplies like food, tools, and other goods. The local people had never seen anything like this before and didn't understand where these things came from. After the war, when the airplanes stopped coming and the supplies stopped arriving, some islanders started to believe that if they recreated the actions they had seen during the war, the airplanes would come back with more cargo. So they built runways, control towers, and even imitation planes out of wood and straw, hoping to attract the mysterious cargo again. This belief that mimicking the actions of the Americans would bring back valuable goods is called a cargo cult. It's a way of trying to understand and replicate something they didn't fully comprehend. The cargo cults show how people can interpret unfamiliar events in their own cultural terms, even if those interpretations don't necessarily match reality. Now, is this what happened to our ancestors? Not exactly in the same way, I don't think. If we had our genes manipulated and enhanced, we matured with these beings constantly on the scene. These entities would still seem like gods in that the technology witnessed must make them gods. Why am I emphasizing this in the context of the prison planet hypothesis? Well, it's to demonstrate that perhaps the Gnostics weren't entirely wrong in calling the God of the Old Testament an evil God. They may not have got things exactly right, but when you peel back the layers of ecclesiastical interpretation from the original Hebrew text and translate Elohim in the plural form, also when you try to align some of the questionable actions and commands of Yahweh with an ethical being, the story changes significantly. One would expect an all-loving, infinite, righteous, and virtuous God to have ethics and morals infinitely above those of mere human beings, right? The Anunnaki certainly didn't possess those qualities, and as we shall see, neither did the Elohim, and especially one member of the Elohim, Yahweh. We'll come to that in the next episode. Without doubt, rendering Elohim in the plural recasts the entire origins narrative. So why is the translation of Elohim so contentious? Why has it been translated as God for so many years? What stunning fact is revealed in the pages of Genesis when the word Elohim is rendered in the plural? The plural form of Elohim reveals plural creatures, plural involvement in our species, evolutionary process, and numerous goals for humanity, reflecting the plural number of these beings with their separate agendas. The environment of Abraham and Sarah, the founders of the Hebrew faith, included the plural Elohim, the powerful ones, which is the root meaning of the word. Paul Wallace further illuminates this by claiming that when some scholars argue that Elohim means the powers of God, and that's why it's in the plural form, they need to take into consideration the other renderings of the pluralization of Elohim in Hebrew and other words. Cherub, a single cherub. Cherubim, more than one cherub, and not the many qualities of the cherub kind. He argues that when translators want to say that it means the powers of God, what they fail to consider is that these powers conflict with one another over the various agendas for humanity. These powers go to war with each other, and when they do, humans get wiped out in the process. Paul Wallace argues that what we are dealing with is ET, a colonizing force on planet Earth with our ancestors caught in the crossfire as they went to war over Project Earth. Wallace reminds us that the ancient Norse mythologies speak of conflicts among advanced beings as they went to war with one another over the management of the people of Earth. These stories can be found to echo all around the world. The ancient Indian Vedas and the stories of the Mahabharata tell of kings warring against each other with advanced technology as they battle for domination over Mission Earth. Greek mythology speaks of advanced beings living nearby, but somehow inaccessible to humanity, living on Mount Olympus. They too battle with one another over questions of how to manage human beings. These stories of wars among the powerful ones are there in Genesis as well. The Hebrew scriptures contain a plethora of tales that can be rendered or referred to as the Sky Council, also known as the Divine Council or the Heavenly Council. However, they do not behave in heavenly or divine manners. Rather, they are frequently at odds with one another on issues as to how the human species should be developed and herded, protected, or otherwise. Therefore, these council members are not representations of a loving holy God. Rather, they are various ET factions vying with one another for control over how the world is run. Richard Dawkins, the famous evolutionary biologist and materialist, isn't someone I usually agree with, but I do align with his description of the God of the Old Testament. He writes, "The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction, jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully." Now, when the Elohim of the Old Testament are seen in these terms, along with the Anunnaki of the Sumerian text, this world being a prison planet seems more likely than ever. And when we see the state of things in the world today, with a relentless push towards authoritarianism in all its forms, the prison becomes more obvious with time. Until the next time.
Oh, here's a little song I wrote. You're mandated to sing it note for note. You'll own nothing and be happy. It's time for the new world order. Confiscating the bricks and mortar, own nothing and be happy. Digital currency, electric cars. Try to run, but you won't get far. Own nothing Be happy. You're getting the hang of this. Okay, fewer people, less CO2. I'm determined to see it through. Oh, nothing. And be happy. See, look how happy I am. We eat the wheel, you eat the bugs. Don't comply and get jailed, thug. Own nothing. Be happy. Another pandemic is on the horizon, but I'll just sit back and enjoy a Hefeweizen. Own nothing. Be happy. Everybody. That's right. Here's a little song I wrote. You better sing it, note for note. Oh, nothing. Be happy. I'm so carefree. You want some things to call your own, and we can't wait to come take your home. You own nothing. Hey, be happy.